Hello again, and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor. Today we will be updating the final round of CONCACAF qualifying for World Cup 2022 for Panama. Before this round, we did a team preview and a player preview for each team. We won't repeat all that information here, but we do urge you to check out those earlier podcasts at our website at soccerviles.captivate.fm. Let's summarize the information covered in each of those podcasts. We gave a more detailed summary in our first podcast of this series, which was for Canada's team.
Right, so a briefer intro here is for the team podcast. We gave some information on the country, so its location and population, and then we looked at the history in World Cup competition and in regional competition of each team. And we took a bit more time taking a look at their recent history. Then we turned our attention to their players, especially the goal scorers in the team podcast. And of course, I went into more detail in the player podcast. And continuing with the team podcast, we looked at their rankings and head-to-head record with the other teams in the groups. And finally, we discussed their schedule and their prospects for this round of qualifying.
Right, and for each of the player podcasts, we organized the teams into positions and looked at the players who had been filling those positions in recent times. We gave some biographical information on them, specifically their history with the national team, and predicted who were the main candidates for each position. Again, in this podcast, we won't be repeating all of that. Rather, we will be looking back on how this round has gone for each team and how correct we were in our predictions of each team's performance and their players. Sometimes we were right, but sometimes players we expected to be used were not, and new players also came in.
Yeah, so we're urging listeners to regard this as a companion podcast to the first one. Again, we won't be repeating the biographical information, at least for the players discussed in that first podcast. But we will, if a new player appears, we will give the biographical information or some of it for that player.
That's right. And finally, in this podcast, we will look towards the future and discuss the prospects of teams and players from this midpoint forward. So we'll start by looking at Panama after 8 of 14 games played.
Okay, let's take a look. And yes, they've been very surprising. I think we predicted them at the bottom or near the bottom of the group at this stage, but they've certainly taken us by surprise, Connor.
They have. I think it must be considered really just a fabulous start for Panama, sitting in fourth, but only 2 points off the top. So it shows you that they're really competitive with the main players here, Canada, US, and Mexico. They started at home with a draw against Costa Rica, then turned in an impressive 3-0 win in Jamaica, and followed that up with a draw at home to Mexico, so a very respectable start. They were beaten by El Salvador in a game that kind of apparently brought them back down to earth, but they recovered with a 1-0 win over the USA. They lost on the road to Canada after that and looked to be heading for another road defeat against Honduras. They were down 2-0 with 13 minutes to go, but spectacularly turned that game around to win 3-2. And then got revenge on El Salvador with a 2-1 home win in their final game, prior to this podcast. So that puts them with a record of 4 wins, 2 draws, and 2 losses. And I think they have to be really satisfied with that start.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't cynical about Panama. I like them as a team, but I think our thesis on them was more they have a lot of aging players. They haven't really done that much to rejuvenate those players. We thought it would catch up with them this time. We thought it would catch up with them after the 2018 World Cup, but those veterans just kind of keep on going. I mean, some of them are retiring from the team, as we'll see shortly, but they seem to have enough and have really done well here.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that they qualified for their first ever World Cup in 2018. That was their first appearance. So We kind of saw that as a bit of a pinnacle for a golden generation. But, so far they've, in the now 3 years since then, they've kind of been able to sustain a relatively high level.
Yeah, I mean, the only game where they kind of looked like what we originally predicted was against Canada, where they were soundly beaten. But that could be put down to the other surprise team in the group, Canada, looking a lot stronger than they've historically been. So any comments on which one you think it was there?
Yeah, the Canada game seems a little bit to be the anomaly. I mean, they took an early lead, but then really it was all Canada, and Canada's 4-1 win didn't flatter them. They kind of deserved it. But yeah, you look at how they've done against the other top teams, a win against the USA and a draw against Mexico. Pretty good so far. So it does seem that the Canada game was, perhaps the outlier, because they've had good results against, difficult opposition, some great road wins too that we mentioned in Jamaica and Honduras.
Right. Well, we'll come back to look at what's ahead for them, but we'll move on to just a quick look at their scorers here. And surprise, surprise, it's, you'll see when we get to talking about forwards, Cecilio Waterman and Rolando Blackburn with 6 of their 11 goals.
Yeah, those two leading the way, and then there's 5 other players who contributed a single goal. No red card for them, so discipline's been good. Any other comments on Panama?
Freddie Gondola is a left midfielder. We'll talk a bit about him. Maybe that's the start of bringing some youth into the side. But Cecilio Waterman and Rolando Blackburn are quite the opposite. They're an example of those veterans who really weren't that well established in the team over the last few years, but really kind of stepping up for them.
Yeah, given more of a chance now.
Yeah. Well, we'll take a look at their formations, and we'll see that it's kind of a different formation every game, but always 4 defenders at the back. It's really the midfield that changes, and that's usually 5 in the midfield, but sometimes 4 and sometimes 3, and then generally playing with a single forward, but sometimes 2 forwards. The most unusual formation for them, I would say, there is the 4-3-3, which they only used once in Honduras, a game which they lost.
They did come back and win that game.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right, I kind of lost my head there, but there we go. Maybe 4-3-3 is the right formation for them then, after all.
Yeah, produced 3 goals, but also conceded 2. So perhaps the pros and cons of that formation all in one.
Yeah, well, we'll take a look at it in more detail as we go here. But I'll just start with a general comment. We generally noted that Panama faces a problem with aging players, as I've said. We expected a lot of players to retire after the success of the 2018 World Cup, but actually only some did at that time, and a few have retired since. But I'm kind of repeating what I said upstairs there. They still continue to rely on their older players, and who can criticize when they've done so well? But let's see how much qualification has started the process of rejuvenation, which will have to start at some point.
Yeah, Panama has been successful beyond expectation in the octagon so far. So no surprise that there's the manager remains in place. Thomas Christensen, the manager of the team since 2020.
Yeah, it struck me as an unusual appointment at first, but he's certainly doing well with them.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to goalkeepers, and it looks like Luis Meja is the guy. Take it away.
Yeah, he started all 8 games. We had given him the edge over Jose Calderon to become the starting keeper following the retirement of longtime starter Jaime Pinedo. Jose Calderon and Orlando Mosquera were on the bench for all games. Luis Meja is 30, and though Calderon is 35, they have some youth, at least, in 25-year-old Mosquero. So really the aging issue is not really a problem for the goalkeeping position.
Right. Okay, but we'll move on to central defenders here. And we noted in the original podcast that Harold Cummings was the only established central defender. In the Gold Cup, they were drafted in wide back. They were drafting in wide backs for the role of central defender. But centre backs were a steady rotation in these 8 games among 3 players: Fidel Escobar, Andres Andrade, and Harold Cummings, as we mentioned. Only Cummings had been in the Gold Cup, but he got injured in game 2, and perhaps is still recovering because he missed the first 3 games here. I should clarify, he got injured in game 2 of the Gold Cup, and so he missed the first 3 games here, maybe as a result of that injury. But then after that, he started 3 in a row, and then wasn't called in for the last 2. Andrade had withdrawn before the Gold Cup in 2021. He had withdrawn injured, so it looks like he's kind of established at the back there. But none more so than Fidel Escobar, who started all 8 games. We hadn't considered him a strong candidate because he had only played on the team since 2019. He had been a regular starter alongside Roman Torres at times, and he's only 29 years old. So his return was much needed here. They had seemed to be struggling to find a combination there, but found it quickly here with Fidel Escobar and Andres Andrade. Though listed as a left back, Andrade seems to be a key central defender for them now. Those who played in the position in the Gold Cup were Richard Peralta, Roderick Miller, and Alfredo Machado. None of those were called up at all here. 3 lesser-known players, Asmaha and Ariano. I'll just put it up on the graphics for those who are watching on YouTube. Asmaha Ariano, Oscar Linton, and Giovanni Ramos. Those were the guys on the bench here. Central defense is complete.
Yeah, interesting with the changes. Obviously, the retirement of stalwart Roman Torres left a gap. So yeah, some change from the Gold Cup, as you mentioned, is interesting. But they, seem to be finding their guys now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they've done quite well.
Yeah, the fullbacks are both relatively established. So starting with left back, Eric Davies is really the only candidate here, and he played in all 8 games. Andreas Andrade, who we discussed earlier, he started as a left back, but now seems to be a central defender. On the other side, Michael Murillo is really the only candidate for this position, and he's been there since 2017. We confirmed that a bout with coronavirus was the reason he was a late scratch for the 2021 Gold Cup, so wasn't in the picture there. Francisco Palacios and Omar Cordoba covered the role in the Gold Cup, but neither were called up here. Rather, Cesar Blackman, who had been injured for the Gold Cup, was the substitute.
All right, so that takes us through the defense. So we'll move on to midfielders, and we're going to combine defensive and central midfielders here. So take it away, Connor.
Sure. So Panama usually used a 4-2-3-1 formation, but sometimes a 4-4-2. So the defensive midfielders are more obvious in the 4-2-3-1 formation, but we'll consider all those midfielders here. Anibal Godoy was a constant figure. He started 7 of their 8 games. Adalberto Carrasquilla partnered him for 3 games. Abdio Ayarsa for 2, and 2 also for Christian Martinez, who last played in 2018, but is still only 24 years old. Veteran Armando Cooper replaced Godoy in the 1 game he did not play, and he was partnered there with Christian Martinez. Miguel Carmajo, their best player in the 2017 Gold Cup, continues to be in exile. A substitute in the Gold Cup, he was not called up for any of the games here.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the left and right midfielders. So we had intimated in the original podcast that Jose Luis Rodriguez was gaining a firm grip on this position, even if the wingers switch sides fairly often. It turns out the position is becoming more competitive. Jose Luis Rodriguez played the position in 4 games, and then he started on the right in the other one. And in the initial podcast, we had introduced Cesar Yanes as something of an understudy to Rodriguez. And that remains the case as he started there in the last game. That was game 8 against El Salvador. But he had subbed into 6 of the 7 others. However, there's a newcomer here, Freddie Gondola, is also making a bid as he started 2 of the games there. And finally, Alberto Quintero was there for 1 game when he and Jose Luis Rodriguez switched flanks as they sometimes do.
Right, on to the right midfield. So although normally wingers Alberto Quintero and Yoel Barcenas shifted around the midfield a lot, basically sharing the right and central midfielder roles. Yoel Barcenas also played as a forward for 1 game. Both of them started the first 6 games, but both were absent for the last 2. Barcenas out with an ankle injury, and Quintero simply not called up. Stepping in for them were Alfredo Stevens for Game 7 and Omar Brown for Game 8. We'll look at Alfredo Stevens as a key substitute since this was his only start, and he is coded as a forward. Omar Brown received his first call-up since November 2020, but we won't dally on him as he was called in only for the last 2 matches as a replacement.
Right. Okay, so moving from that shifting midfield, especially on the right side, we move on to the forward line. We include attacking midfielders when we talk about forwards here. So as we saw in the role above, between the role of attacking midfielder, it's covered between Yoel Barcenas and Alberto Quintero. Together, they both started the first 6 games and missed the last 2. And the absence is perhaps what prompted that formation change we talked about earlier. Ironically, both Akita's left midfielder, which Alberto Quintero played only once when he switched flanks with Jose Luis Rodriguez, Barcenas also took a turn as a co-forward. Now, we may have to change those primary designations in time here.
Yeah. We noted in the original podcast that the position of forward was quite interesting with several possible candidates, but no clear ones. And we were kind of waiting on qualification to perhaps give some clarification. As it was, 31-year-old Rolando Blackburn seems to have won out. He started all but the last game, usually as a lone forward. We expressed surprise at his role as a starting forward in the 2021 Gold Cup, because he had last been called up in September 2019 and was never a starter in any of his tournaments since 2013, and in fact was often not called up for them. But he seems to have cemented his place in the lineup now. Jose Fajardo and Cecilio Waterman formed a 2-man offense in the last game, but otherwise had only subbed in a couple of times and were called up for half the games or less. The Waterman, as we mentioned at the start, does have 3 goals to his name. Veteran Gabriel Torres was not selected for the first 3 games, but was used smatteringly as a substitute after that, coming into 2 of the games, 2 of their 8 games here.
Right. So, yeah, I still don't really see that as, kind of a permanent solution. I mean, Rolando Blackburn's getting a little old there. Same with Gabriel Torres. Torres is 32 years old now, 33, I guess. Fajardo is 27 years old, so not bringing a lot of youth in there. Cecilio Waterman, I should mention, is 30 years old. So again, ever since 2018, we've been saying that they're not really rejuvenating, and we still don't really see it. We'll take a look at some key substitutes, though, because that's probably where we would see it. And do you want to talk about that, Connor?
Sure. So we saw Alfredo Stevens get his only start as a right winger, even though he is normally listed as a forward. He's been with the team on and off since 2012. That he had 13 caps in 9 years suggests it is more off than on. But he did play in 7 of their 8 games here, though starting just the once. Left midfielder Eduardo Guerrero subbed in twice, but started on the bench for 7 of the 8 games. He earned his first cap in 2017, but these qualifiers have been his most active period. At 21, he may be one of their future prospects. And then finally, we only made a brief mention of Abdio Ayarsa as having started 2 games in the midfield. He is coded as a defensive midfielder. He was called up for all 8 games and played in 6 of them, starting twice, which we had mentioned. He is 29 years old and earned his first cap in October 2019, so he's a bit of a latecomer to the team.
Yeah, they tend to kind of bring players in out of the cold, or players' first caps for the national team, in their late 20s is no surprise for Panama. We'll talk about a couple of new players here, Christian Martinez and Freddie Gondola. We did discuss Christian Martinez above. He's not really a rejuvenation because he was recalled after a 3-year absence rather than earning his first caps in these qualifying games. Nevertheless, he is 24 years of age, so he may be one that the next generation can kind of build on. And Freddie Gondola is really the only truly new player. He's not that young either at 26, but he is providing some competition for the left midfielder, or you may view it as a winger role.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they still bring down the average age of the team. We should mention Freddie Gondola. He plays with Táchira in Colombia. And then Christian Martinez, he plays with the Chicago Fire in Major League Soccer and has been with them since 2019. So he's, again, 24 years old. Playing in the U.S., I do think that he would be someone we'll expect to see, for a couple years down the road.
Yeah, I mean, he was Christian Martinez selected for the preliminary squads as early as the Copa America Centenario in 2016. Also selected on the preliminary squad for the World Cup in 2018. So he's kind of been around the team a little bit. Also in 2019, he was he wasn't selected for the preliminary squad for that one, but he's been around. Meanwhile, Freddie Gondola earned his first cap in 2021. So he, as I said, is truly new to the team. So we'll just kind of summarize all of that by looking at the basically the default starting lineup here. And do you want to take us through that, Connor?
Sure. So once again, Thomas Christensen, the manager, the well-traveled manager, being with Panama since 2020, though. In net, we have Luis Meja, seems to be firmly entrenched as the #1 goalkeeper. Defenders, we mentioned 3 key names: Fidel Escobar, Andreas Andrade, and Harold Cummings, kind of sharing the role. And then left backs, pretty consistently, Eric Davis, and a right back, Michael Murillo. In terms of midfielders, we have Jose Luis Rodriguez.
Sorry, Connor, I realized I didn't prepare the graphic there. There's defensive and central midfielders to talk about too.
Sure. Actually, yes. Thanks for the reminder. That is a good place to start. Anibal Godoy, really one of the anchors of the team. He is in kind of that key defensive midfielder. Adalberto Carrasquilla, Abdio Ayarsa, and Christian Martinez kind of also in contention, kind of in the center of the park. Now on to left midfielders. Jose Luis Rodriguez is the main choice. Freddie Gondola and Cesar Yanis also coming in. And then on the right, you have Yoel Barcenas and Alberto Quintero. Both of those two also share kind of the main attacking midfielder role in that 4-2-3-1 setup. And then the main forward so far has been Rolando Blackburn, who's chipped in with 3 goals so far.
Yeah. And, I don't know, Cecilia Waterman getting 3 goals kind of deserves to be there, but actually hasn't played that much there. So he may play a bigger role coming up, but 3 goals in the amount of games he's played is pretty good. Let's move back to the team and focus our attention to the upcoming fixtures for Costa Rica. Do you see any pattern there, Connor?
No, they have 3 games at home and 3 games on the road. What does stand out is they have a couple really tricky road games. Mexico and the USA being their last game on the road, but also Costa Rica, which will be their first game back. So those are 3 pretty tricky road games, but on the road to Mexico and the US, who it should be said they've taken 4 points from so far, but all those points were at home. So that's a tricky schedule. Their home games then are to Jamaica, Honduras, and then they end at home to Canada.
Those are very tough road games, and I can't help but feel that it'll be difficult for them to keep up. I don't want to sound cynical about Panama, because when we look back at the original podcast we did, we were basically dead wrong about them, and they proved much better than we thought they were going to be, and yet I still kind of feel that they won't be able to kind of keep up this pace. How about you, Connor?
I have the same feeling as you. A couple of surprise points, and a couple like Honduras, some really surprising under the circumstances, being basically 2-0 down in the 77th minute. So, they've managed to get some kind of unexpected points, we'll say. That said, they're on 14 points right now in 4th, which would be good enough for the Intercontinental playoff, but they're 5 points ahead of Costa Rica. So what they've done is they've given themselves a bit of a buffer to try and nail down that last spot at the very least. I don't really see them being competitive with Canada, USA, and Mexico, but I think 4th would be a very good achievement for them, and they're in a very good position to at least try and finish in that playoff spot.
Right. Well, Costa Rica have been definitely disappointing by their own standards, because they, traditionally have been the 3rd team in the region. They can even things up quite a bit here if they win that first game against Panama. Then there will be just 2 points between them, and I'm sure Costa Rica will be vying to get into that playoff spot. At least, this isn't a discussion of Costa Rica, so we'll save that. Whether they can get into the top 3 for the podcast on Costa Rica, but I'm tired of you beating around the bush here, Connor. Give it to me straight. Is Panama going to end up in 4th?
I think they will. I'm going to say they're in 4th. The key game, as you alluded to, is their very first game back after the break. They're away to Costa Rica, who are the team closest on their tails. After that game, they go away to Mexico. So if they got 0 points from there, then it could kind of really blow it open. But that said, they've worked hard to get themselves where they are now, and they know that even just a draw in Costa Rica is a really good point for them. And then it would leave, Costa Rica having to make up 5 points in 5 games. That's going to be very difficult. So, I expect them to drop points in some of their difficult games, but I think they've done enough, perhaps just enough, from kind of these first 8 games that 4th is realistic, and I do expect them to finish there. However, I expect that, perhaps they'll be closer to 5th and 3rd kind of when the dust settles. But if they can hang on to 4th, I think they should be quite pleased.
Yeah, I mean, they do end with tough games against the USA and Canada. However, if the USA and Canada are basically kind of comfortably qualified by that time, they may kind of field more experimental teams, which may give Canada may give Panama a couple of points out of what seemed to be very tough games at the end, but which may not actually be.
Yeah, the game against Costa Rica is crucial, but if they are aiming big, and why not, having just come off their first World Cup, then they'll look at those games, against USA and Canada right at the end as a chance to potentially make up some ground and to make it at the very least uncomfortable for some of those teams if they're able to kind of maintain a pace. I don't see it as particularly likely, but if you're a Panama fan, that's what you would be hoping for, is that you're playing meaningful games all the way till the end.
Right, and definitely they will, need to win those two middle games at home to Jamaica and Honduras to keep up that space and perhaps win the fourth place spot. Okay, well, that brings us to the end. We'll just kind of finish by reminding listeners of our fairly new website. It is soccerfiles.captivate.fm. So soccer is SOCCER. Files is with a PH, so that's PHILES. Soccer Files, all one word. .captivate. CAPTIVATE.FM. We'll work on getting a simpler address as we progress here.
That's right. Well, yes, check it out if you want to refresh yourself on any of the Panama players or their history. But otherwise, we will see you next time.
Great. Thanks, Connor. I'll see you next time when we deal with the bottom four.
All right.